Welcome back to another episode of Leading to Succeed, a Grant County Schools podcast. Very excited to have two very important district leaders with us here today to talk about a topic that affects everyone. The classroom teacher, the classified staff, bus driver. Truly does impact all of us, and that is our district budget. So to Brian Linder and Amanda Eldridge, thank you both for being here, and appreciate your willingness to talk to us today to share some information that maybe potentially will demystify the budget process and allow our viewers and listeners an opportunity to gain some insight as to exactly how that budget is developed and what the implications for the budget are across the district. As I do with every episode, I'd like to begin just by giving you both an opportunity to share a little bit about kind of your career journey and how did you land in Grant County Schools in the position that you're currently in.
Well, I'll start. I'm a Grant County graduate from 1990, and from there I went to UK, graduated, and then worked 16 years at Owen Electric in their finance department. I have an MBA from Thomas More College, and I started here. It's been about 7 or 8 years ago in the finance department as the finance director. I followed Matt Morgan when he became superintendent.
Okay, very good.
I graduated from here in 1993 and then went to Campbellsville University where I graduated with a business degree. And right before I came here, I worked for Toyota for 10 years and did some HR and finance for Toyota.
Well, I appreciate you saying your background. Just so we're clear, Brian, you're the Chief Finance Officer.
Mm-hmm.
And then Amanda, you're Assistant Finance and also HR, correct?
Correct.
Okay, well that'll certainly play into our discussion a little bit later today. So without any further hesitation, we'll just jump right in. Brian, I want to start with you and talk a little bit about the budget cycle. People may not realize that the budget is actually built over a period of several months. Do you care to talk about the different phases of the budget cycle and what that looks like?
Sure. So there really are 3 key time frames that we look at. So, and I'll just use kind of right now as a good example. Mm-hmm. When we get to our fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30th, it matches the school year. So July 1 will be the new fiscal year, and we call that fiscal year 27, which will be the 26-27 school year. And so when it comes to the 27 budget, we actually start in January, and we are supposed to provide to the board in January what they call a draft budget. Now, a draft budget, you have very few pieces of the puzzle together, and so it's a lot of estimations. It's taking a look at where you're at currently in this current budget and maybe projecting out a possible carryover to the next year. Then in May, we will actually present to the board, which they have to pass, the tentative budget. Mm-hmm. And when we get to the tentative budget, we have more pieces to the puzzle at that point. We'll have salary tables that will be attached to that so we know what we're looking at next year in a salary increase. But we're still missing pieces of the puzzle. One of those would be that we're basing all that on current staff because we don't know our staff for next year. Mm-hmm. Something else we don't know is what will the tax rate be. So while it's a little bit more in depth than the draft budget, it's still not complete. Then when we get to September, the board will have to pass what we call the working budget. And that at that point, it has all the puzzle pieces together. We know what our staff is. We know what the salary tables will look like. We know what our tax revenue is. By then we'll know what our SEEK information is coming from the state. And so by then we then construct a budget that puts all those pieces together, and then that becomes our working budget through the rest of that fiscal year.
So one of the things that I found remarkable when I became superintendent is the missing puzzle pieces, as you put it. So we're trying to establish salary tables in May and propose a draft budget while there are so many unknowns. So how do you hedge against that? I could see a district getting into some real trouble if the philosophy is let's just spend every dime that we have in this year. Do you want to zero out at the end of the year? What do you do with any money that's left over, and why would that be important?
Well, we definitely tried not to zero out because you need some carryover for the following year, because when you set the tax rate in August, you won't receive any of that real estate money until November, the tax collections through the month of October. So you've got to have enough to carry over through those first few months until you can get to that point. So yes, you do want to carry over. Plus it's also, and I'm sure at some point we'll talk about contingency funds, but you also want your carryover budget kind of becomes somewhat of a contingency fund for you too. And so no, you don't want a budget to zero. You want to have, and I think you'll see as we go through this, our fiscal policy is long-term, not short-term. We try to look down the road and make sure things are smooth and not more short-term where we could lead to some problems down the road.
I know several districts are struggling with that right now, and you may have seen some of those districts reported on in the news. And essentially, as best I understand it, is there was an influx of cash that occurred during the pandemic through ESSER relief funds, and some positions were created in districts and raises were given. And what happened is I always heard you talk about a soft landing for this district, but perhaps other districts didn't plan as well. And so they found themselves with a revenue stream that dried up essentially because they weren't getting funds from the federal government to be able to continue the practices that they had initiated. So I just want to take a moment to say how much I appreciate Brian, Amanda, and previous administrators for having the foresight to see that that funding was for a limited time only. So doing things like attendance bonuses and investing in some curriculum resources and some staff training made a lot of sense to me when I understood that, because we didn't want to find ourselves in a situation like, again, many districts are now currently facing, to have a budget deficit and then have to be tasked with the hard decision of perhaps reducing the workforce or making staff cuts. So thank you for having the wisdom to navigate through that process very skillfully. Talk to me a little bit, either one of you. Do you consult with district leaders or principals in the development of that budget and kind of get a feel for what the needs of the district are?
Yes, I'll take that because I deal mostly with on the budget side of putting it together. But principals not so much, because they have a site-based budget and that's determined on a formula. So we let them know last month what projected on the attendance, current attendance, what their site-based budget could be. But yes, we do try to check with technology and maintenance and just those different department leaders of, do they see anything coming? Because the last thing we want is to be surprised in fiscal year 27 that transportation and maintenance needs a new truck. So they've already communicated to us, so we can kind of, as we build that budget, we can kind of work that in, so that's not a surprise for us. And we're, as you mentioned a while ago, we don't budget to zero, but if you did and then you have an air conditioning unit to go down or a surprise, a purchase that we weren't notified of, it can make things a little tough. So yes, we do kind of reach out and try to get a good feel of what some upcoming expenses in the next fiscal year or really down the road could be.
Sure. So I do want to take a moment to also kind of let our viewers and listeners know too that, and I used to say this to the high school students when I was principal all the time, everything that exists within the district exists for their learning. So if we have to buy a truck, it's so that we can perform certain functions within the district to keep our schools up and running, safe, clean, all the things that are necessary and conducive to a positive learning experience and a positive learning environment. And I'm not sure that the typical layperson may understand that if they see a new truck driving down the road with the Grant County Schools. All vehicles have a lifespan, and you can get upside down with, if the vehicle's not reliable and you're pouring a lot of money into it, there is an end of life for that vehicle. Right. So we're just not out trying to make our workers comfortable, but all those things are tools to help us make our facilities and our services optimized for student learning. We've even gone so far as to develop a strategic plan with the board, and I know that you and I have had many conversations when it comes to the budget to make sure that our budget reflects the goals of our strategic plan. And so, yeah, especially when it comes to some of our capital projects, those projects are in tune and aligned with our strategic plan. So I appreciate that as well.
And just to add on to what you say, we also try to stagger those purchases too. You know, we don't wait till all of our buses are ready for replacement and replace them all at once.
That's right.
We do a little bit every year, so it kind of spreads that cost. Same thing with, you know, maintenance, and if they need a vehicle, it's not. We try to replace those over time, so they all don't go out at one time, and it's a huge hit in one year.
Very good. We're going to shift to human resource a little bit, Amanda, so this conversation will involve you. Staff allocations and HR are impact the budget probably more than any other single domain. So I know right now you're in the middle of running some student enrollment projections, and you do that throughout the year. Can you talk to us why you do that and what the importance of that is?
Sure. We base our employee allocations, just like every school district in the state of Kentucky, on some KDE guidelines, and those are based on our student numbers projected for the next school year. So at various times throughout the school year, we will run enrollment numbers, and like I said, KDE provides Kentucky Department of Education provides some guidelines for us, some maximum student to teacher ratios that we use to help us in determining the number of teachers or staff members that we will need in each of our school districts. So we run those throughout the year. We started in January looking at next year. We ran those in January just for internally for us to look at and wrap our minds around what next year might look like. In February, we met with the principals for the first time and shared those numbers with them so that they could start to get their game plan together for the next school year. We will do that 2 more times, giving them their final allocations in April, so that they can be ready to go for the next school year.
So just as a follow-up to that, you know, when I became an elementary principal, I didn't realize that those ratios were different even within an elementary school. So we technically have a preschool ratio, we have a primary grades ratio, kindergarten through 2nd grade, and then we have a 3rd and 4th grade ratio, a 5th and 6th grade ratio, and then we have a secondary ratio. So that everybody kind of knows out there, the number of teachers that are in a building is not arbitrary, and we don't do it again for adult comfort. We are basically following the guidelines that are set forth through statute that determines the class size ratio. I think the smallest is preschool, 20-1, and I believe high school, secondary is the largest, and that's right around 30-1, with some opportunities for some exceptions if site-based council determines that there needs to be an exception. So the number of teachers that we have in our schools across the district are directly correlated to the number of students that we have.
Correct.
And then we have some additional responsibilities there too. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Monitoring those numbers throughout the year.
Yes.
We do monitor those numbers a few times throughout the year. The very first time we do it in the school year is in September on the 20th day of school, just to make sure that we maintain those student to teacher ratios. And we really try hard to keep our class sizes as small as we can for the benefit of the students. So we do monitor those throughout the year, adding staff as needed.
And then I'll say that one of the things that I appreciate about Grant County when I got here that's a little bit different than other districts that I'm aware of is that we work real hard to make sure that each of our elementary schools have a full-time school counselor, and that we have a media specialist, and we support in various other ways. We have curriculum specialists that are assigned throughout the district, and then we are obligated to, there's ratios associated with students with IEPs that we have to ensure that they're receiving the services as prescribed in their individual education plan. So those are added staff. So when you take a look at the number of teachers that we have in the district, all of those things are a part of that calculation. And then we have related service providers too. I think of speech and language and some occupational therapy. And then we have support for English as a second language students within the district. So it really is a big puzzle, going back to Brian's metaphor earlier, that we really have to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all students. and that we are staffing according to the ratio, and that we are being as judicious as we can with our money and our budget to ensure that we're providing the best education we can within the constraints and guidelines that we have.
And just to add on to that, and I think it's always a good point, we don't print money in the basement.
That's right.
We don't. So we do have a set pie that we have to work from. And so we have to make sure that when we allocate things, we're allocating them to the best for the student and for the employer, because we don't have an unlimited source of cash that we can just do whatever we want. I was talking to the Boone County finance director the other day, and he says one thing he says to his board is, "We can do anything you want, but we can't do everything you want." And I thought that was a very good phrase, that
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
can do a lot of things. We can't do everything, but we can do some things.
Well, to that point, occasionally we are the beneficiary of a windfall every now and then. So I do know that we've had some grant-funded positions over the past few years. Do you want to talk about how those work? Are those permanent positions, or how do they operate?
So we have several funds across our budget, and I'll leave most of them out, but or I'll focus on the two main ones. But to mention the other ones, we have a capital outlay, a building fund, a construction fund, food service, a lot of those different funds. But when we talk about, especially when it comes to the board and what they're in charge of, or they just allocate our general fund, which we call Fund 1. But we also have a Fund 2, which is made up of federal and state grants. And so we have the ability to use those. Now, those are usually targeted for specific things. It could be special ed, like our IDA budget. We have title funds, which is for at-risk students. And so those allow us to have additional staff in our elementary schools that we probably wouldn't be able to have if we just had general fund money. So we try to use our title allocations to pick up 3 or 4 more teachers in our elementary schools, because that helps our at-risk students and our special needs students.
And just to clarify, that's above and beyond
Supplemental.
the ratio. So it's
Correct.
supplemental.
Yes.
Supplemental.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So now, usually when it comes to state and federal grants, there's some strings tied. And when I say strings tied, is there's certain things that we can and we cannot do with them. We can't go build a ball field with the federal funds. So and we are monitored. We're audited. We're monitored by KDE. And at times even the federal government. So we have to do reports for that. So yes, federal funds and state grants are a real asset to us. But we like to keep those, well, they have to be kept separate from the general fund. But what we operate, when I say we, the board, in the school district, the local taxpayer, those are all from general fund money.
Very good. It's a great transition into our next topic, which I know that you know a lot about, Brian. I want to talk about SEEK and local effort, and a little bit about the distinction between the two. SEEK stands for Supporting Education Excellence in Kentucky, and that's been around for a number of years. I believe that was implemented with CARA, if I'm not mistaken, the legislative act that occurred in 1990 that addressed a reform in Kentucky education. Can you talk to us a little bit about what SEEK is and how that affects our funding?
So to mention the legislation that you brought up from 1990, the courts ruled Kentucky school districts were unconstitutional. How they were funded was unconstitutional. And so what they found was that some poor districts were having issues with their funding. And so they created a formula, and that formula has always been looked at and talked about being changed and could be changed at any point. But basically what it does is it looks at, we are guaranteed a per pupil, which I think this year it's just a little bit over $4,500. And our SEEK formula, it's a formula that the state uses. It takes one of the main, so there's several pieces to that puzzle too, but it takes your ADA, your average daily attendance is part of that. Your local taxes, your tax base is a part of that. And then what they do is for example, a poorer district will get more state funding through SEEK. A more wealthy district would get less SEEK, but that's made up by their local tax base. And so Grant County kind of falls about in the middle of the state. Even at the board meeting, what was the phrase you used
I
last
said
night?
we're too rich to be poor and too poor to be rich.
Yes. So I guess that would assume that we're middle class.
Right,
So,
right.
But so yes, so we're kind of in that middle realm where we're having a lot of our property values in Grant County are going up, and so as that happens year to year, we're starting to see a little bit less of our seat numbers tends to come down just a little bit to meet that guaranteed per student fund. And so it's something that it's it can be both a blessing and something that we have to deal with, because as we get as our county and our district becomes more wealthy, we're going to get less money from the state, and we just need to learn as we budget how to deal with that.
And just as a point of clarification, when you say wealth, we're really talking about the total assessed values of property throughout the county. And if I remember at our work session last night, we had a presentation from our finance advisor, and we are almost at $2 billion worth of wealth.
Property value in the county, yes.
And so that does impact the level of state contribution versus local effort.
Correct.
So when we're talking about local effort, we're essentially talking about the school tax. Is that correct?
Yes. So really, general fund has two main. I mean, there are several avenues of revenue that comes in through the general fund. The two main ones are the SEEK funding from the state and then from our local tax. So we talked earlier about setting the tax rate in August. People will pay their property tax either in October, November, or December. And then that we get a portion of that with the tax rate that was set by the board, and that's our second really main pot of money in our general fund. So that's our local effort. That's what we get, and so those two things together make up mostly of our general fund.
Okay, well, I appreciate that clarification on that. You know, a lot of times people, I hesitate to bring this up, but I want to be transparent. A lot of times if you look at your property tax bill, the largest tax will be the school tax on that. But I would also point out that we're typically, if not the largest employer within a taxable district, the second largest. I believe I saw a report not long ago that Fayette County was the second largest employer in Fayette County, the public schools, and I think their budget is in the billions. But it does impact a lot of people, and it takes a lot of money to run a school district, as we talked just about staffing and how we have to meet the needs of all children. And there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of pieces, a lot of working and moving parts to be able to support a child's education. So that's a little bit of clarification that I think it's important for people to understand, that it's a sizable operation, and oftentimes the biggest economic generator in a community, and probably the largest, if not one of the top employers within a community as well. Thank you for sharing on that. We've talked about federal grants a little bit. I want to talk about cost-saving initiatives. What can a school district do, and specifically what has Grant County done to try to save some costs over the years?
A few years ago, we did an energy savings contract that was major for us to kind of cut those costs. Well, what is that? What is an energy saving? Well, that's where we put controls on HVAC. So like, if you think about when school is out over Christmas, we're not heating a chair without a student in it. Or over the summer we'll have cutbacks. We put several things in to cut our water bill, and so those are some cost savings that we've seen. But there are several other things, but we are constantly trying to look. I mean, even to the point last night where Brian from RSA was talking about, when it gets to a certain point, we'll refinance a bond and save, a couple $100,000 on that. So it's just something that we're constantly looking at.
Another thing from a superintendent lens is we're involved with 2 education co-ops that are set up through the state, and there's a lot of services that we utilize through those education co-ops that are free of cost just because we are members of those co-ops. I do want to brag on our Office of Teaching and Learning for a minute too. Just last year they were responsible for securing over $1.7 million worth of grants that we've been able to provide teachers with some relief time out of class and high quality professional development. So anytime that we can save some money or anytime that we can get something paid for, I feel like this office has aggressively pursued those options. And a grant is not a small undertaking. As you know, there's tons of monitoring and reporting and data sharing that has to go along with those grants. Amanda, what about from an HR perspective? What are some cost-saving initiatives that Grant County has engaged in?
Some of the most recent things that we've done, we've moved a lot of things online. And the more that you move online, the less paper pushing, manual time entry, stuff like that. So that has allowed some of our staff members to reduce the number of days that they want to work. And that's an option for them if they would like to. But even here in the district office, we have several staff members who have reduced the number of days that they want to work, which is a cost savings to the district.
Yeah, I can remember when I've only been in the district since 2019, and no disrespect to any former departments or administrators, but we did not even have electronic time cards
That is correct.
during that time, and my paycheck was delivered to me via the pony mail.
That is correct.
And so we've come a long way over the course of the past few years, and appreciate your efforts on that. And I do agree. I think it takes some of the manual steps out of it, and so we're able to access information quicker and synthesize it at a much faster pace. So we've been able to reduce some days for some employees that normally were just engaged in the processing of those documents.
And not only does it save money by reducing days, but it also makes them more efficient and be able to do more things than what maybe staff in the past were able to do. Because I remember payroll when I first started here was it was a several day process where they went through. They had several people that would go through a proof, manually entering things and
We were manually calculating people's hours.
Yes.
Wow.
And so now, Amanda, through her efforts through Frontline and a lot of the online things that employees are now doing, it makes it more efficient for the employee, where they only have to go in and click in and click out. But it does make our department more efficient and be able to do more things in less days than we've ever been able to do before.
And it's still with no shortage of work to be done.
No.
Again, going back to all the reporting, the monitoring, I know you've recently just worked on the printing of W-2s. That's no small task. And so the department, I feel like, is always busy, both departments, because you have to prepare for audits and the budget cycle. And so there's always something to do. But I appreciate the effort to work smarter, not harder, throughout that process.
And I mentioned this at the board meeting, and I'll say it one more time. They run 21 million in payroll a year, 21 million of payroll, and auditors came in and found zero mistakes.
That's impressive.
Yes. I mean, if you really stop and think about the amount of money that is, run through payroll and without one mistake that was, we make mistakes? Yes, we make mistakes and we find them and we fix them. But when the auditors come in, they found no mistakes. And I think that's rare for when they go into school districts and audit.
Well, kudos to the department for that.
Thank you.
So you talked about audit. That provides a perfect segue into our next segment, which has to do with transparency. So you said that the school district is audited. How often does that occur, and what does that look like?
It's becoming more and more a big part of my job. We are audited yearly, in that because of the federal funds that went through all the school districts back during COVID. And just to kind of wrap a number, it was over $10 million that Grant County received from what we call ESSER COVID funds. Now, that's all been spent. There was time limits on to do that, but auditors were tasked with really deep dive auditing to make sure that those funds were being spent the way they were, and of course we followed the letter of the law, but the result, I think, of that is that audits today seem to be more. I mean, just last year we went through, I don't even know if I can name them all. We go through our regular yearly financial audit, But KDE also does auditing. We were audited on Title I. I think audited on IDEA. And so it seems like constantly people are coming, groups are coming in needing to see this. And we have been, that's usually when we sit down with our auditors, one of the first things we say to them is we are completely transparent. You ask whatever you need, if we will get it for you. And if we're not doing it, we want to be able to do it. The auditors will comment at the board meeting that they really appreciate the transparency of our staff and getting them not only what they need, but get it to them in a timely manner. They will talk about how other school districts will hum around and not give them what they need. And we've never done that. We've always given them what they wanted. So we try to be transparent, as transparent can be. We put, I send to Danielle every month the financial report. It's on the website, so anybody could get on and see where how money is being spent. My office is always open to either employees or the public. And I'll mention we really look at, we have three main clients. We have students, we have employees, and we have taxpayers. And we want to be transparent to all groups. And so our offices are always open for anybody from the public or any of our staff that wants to come in, sit down, and just ask questions. And like I said, we'll say the same thing we say to the auditors. We'll get you whatever you want. And if we don't have it, we'll figure out how to get it for you.
One thing that I think is important to mention too about the audits, sometimes we have policies and procedures in place because of auditors. We don't say no or do things to our staff members, just because that's what we want to do. We've been told that's by auditors, this is how the process has to flow. And so I think if people could understand that sometimes.
I think you read my mind. I was going to make that point too, that as superintendent, I've made people unhappy sometimes with hard decisions, and I have to say no to some requests. And that's not because I take any delight in saying no, and I am not sympathetic or empathetic towards their case. But to your point, that we are audited and it is reviewed. And if we are in non-compliance, we will be cited. And depending on the type of audit, is that there could be some corrective action that is required and potentially some funding cuts imposed as a sanction for not being compliant. So a lot of our policies and regs, as you pointed out, are not arbitrary. They're because they're best practices and they are in alignment with the guidelines that are set forth by those grant givers. So that's important. I appreciate you making that distinction. All right. Well, this has been a good conversation. I appreciate both of you taking the time to talk with us today, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners have learned a lot. I do want to close with a final question. So as the CFO, what is one thing that you wish every community member understood about school district finance?
One thing, huh?
You feel free to go over that.
I think I've already kind of brought up a couple things. I think maybe, and I'll address maybe with the public on this, because I think the public will see. We've had people come to the board meeting and say, "Oh, I've seen your bank account, and you, why don't you cut taxes?" And there's a variety of reasons. One, we talked about being able to have a contingency fund. We didn't mention we try to have a contingency fund of at least 5% KDE. I'm sorry, not KDE, but the legislature is looking at passing a law this year that would mandate a 2.5%. We want to be above that. There are districts who have 10%. We feel like that's not being a good use of our dollars, so we've kind of settled on 5%. But we'll have a bank account. Inside that bank account includes money for our bonds. Next week, I will pay a bond of $1 million. I've got to have that in the bank. So we have separations of funds. Food service, the money that's in food service cannot be used anywhere else in the district. The money that's set aside for our bonds, for our bond payment and our construction, cannot be used for raises or anything else. So I think there is sometimes misconception when people see maybe a bank account and say, well, they've got all this money, why can't they give a raise, or why can't they do a tax decrease or a tax cut? And the answer is if we could, we would. We try to budget within those limits because we know that come April, or in 1st of April, I've got $1 million bond payment, and that's one of about 6-7 bond payments I make throughout the year. So I just think that if I could communicate one thing, is that we do have what we call restricted funds, and they can, an amount of money cannot be used for anything else. It's restricted.
I appreciate that. Amanda, what about you?
I think I would say we truly do a really good job here when we're making staffing decisions. We really do put the students first. How can we keep those class sizes small, and what's best for our students?
Yes, student learning is what I say that we do better than any other institution, and that's the way it ought to be, and that's what we'll preserve. I want to go ahead and jump in and give an answer too, because I've learned a lot over the past couple of years about district finance, and that would be to say that sometimes I think when people see the budget, they assume that there's cash, all that bottom line is cash on hand in the bank. And that's certainly not the way that it works. So that we are a pass-through, and that we have waves of income that are inconsistent throughout the course of the year. And we have sometimes encountered where government shutdowns or political reasons that budgets may be interrupted or cut, and so some money that we had budgeted to receive through federal grants may be in jeopardy, and then we have to pivot. So going back to that 5% contingency, it's for reasons like that, because once we contract an employee for an entire year, regardless of what the government does, we are obligated to meet the terms of our contract. So I know that's happened to several districts even as recently as this past year. So to know that it's not all of that money is sitting in the bank on July 1, and we have access to it, that it is very much a best guess, and that we have to be adaptable throughout the year. And then the other thing is there's unforeseen costs. And we've recently had to replace a boiler at the high school. It was approximately 28 years old, and it had come to its end of life. And so we have to be able to fund that. And so it's important for us to have some money on hand. Well, again, I appreciate you both sharing your wisdom. I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate the attention to student learning and responsibility and making sure that we're clean on audits. I know that's no small task. So I think it's great for our community to have an opportunity to hear from you and see you and to know a little bit more about the work. And so until next time on Leading to Succeed, we wish you all a good week, and we'll see you next month with another opportunity to learn more about leadership within the Grant County School District. Thank you.